Levers for optimization, ESG, diversity, think differently. Diversity is important in the mining industry for a number of reasons. I often talk about the fact that we don't have a diversity and inclusion problem in our industry at the moment. We actually have a diversity and inclusion solution to an innovation and creativity problem. And so if you look at where the sector is at the moment, we're kind of at this crossroad in the sector. Up until now, we've been able to be sort of operate the same way, relatively, same way over a number of years. But now with a lot of the pressures that we're seeing with ESG coming at us, the levers for optimization, the way that we need to operate, the way that we're being held to account, our social license to operate is all actually changing. So you have to think that the thinking that got us to where we are today isn't necessarily the thinking that's going to get us to where we are tomorrow. So for me, that diversity is really critical to make sure that we can actually start looking at some of these problems that we've created in the industry in a really different way and find new and innovative ways to actually solve those problems. So if you think about the mining industry, and actually this kind of applies to any industry, up until this point, we've been measured on the levers of cost and volume. You could argue that we've been measured on quality probably the last 15 to 20 years. And when quality was introduced in mining in particular, particularly the larger iron ore players, that kind of blew people's minds a little bit. Maybe minders, not minds. And what we did there was we created things like integrated planning in different departments, but we were able to kind of segregate that to an extent to actually allow the operations part of the business to really still focus on cost and tons. What we're seeing now with ESG coming in is ESG is actually driving a really big revolution in mining. I think there was a lot of thought thinking that digital was going to drive the revolution, but in my view, ESG is actually driving the revolution and digital is a response to that. So we had cost and volume, and then we had quality. But now with what ESG, what it's doing is we're going to go from cost, volume, quality. We're going to have emissions, energy, social, water. Those levers for optimization are actually going to become far too great for the human mind alone to actually cognitively process. So we have to think differently about how we're actually going to organize ourselves and structure ourselves and what that looks like. So really what we're doing in idoba is actually saying, well, how do we actually measure these things? When you look at cost and volume, it's easy to measure sort of the economic impact of those two things. But now we've actually got to look across these multiple levers for optimization. Some of them are actually just social license to operate, but ultimately they still have an economic impact. So how do we actually manage that whole social license to operate, ensure the operations are still economically viable? And how do we actually, though, ensure that all of the different parts of the business actually continue to be connected? And how do we make decisions in that connected world? And to expand on that a little bit further, if you think about what does that connectedness mean? In the past, we were able to actually take the value chain of mining. You could kind of break it up into nice digestible chunks for human consumption and say, you're the manager or the general manager of this department. You go ahead and actually optimize that part of your business. When we're in a world then though, where everything's actually got to be interconnected, then you're actually going to have to change the way that the organization is structured, the way that information is distributed, and the way that everything's connected together. Because for instance, if a maintenance manager decides to reduce costs over here, but that increases emissions over here, how do you actually manage that trade-off and what does that look like? So a lot of the work that we're doing in idoba is to really foresee that future and look forward to say, okay, well, when we are actually managing a business across multiple levers for optimization, how do you do that? And that's really the solution that we're working on around DIMOS, which is around a distributed, integrated, intelligent mining management operating system, and ensuring that all of the information is able to be distributed to the right people who need to make the decisions. It's integrated, it's intelligent, but ultimately it's still based off a management operating system that enables profitability and economic viability.